Hell with Vince McMahon. I don't need him.
Radiation is a curious thing. No one expects what it would bring.
Well, hello. Here we are again, another edition of Kato Reviews. Today, I have a very special guest. But first, I'm looking good, feeling good, loving life. I hope that you can say the same. Today, my guest, he is a world-renowned announcer, a promoter. He is Mr. Joe Dombrowski. Joe?
Thank you very much for having me. That's a very like Captain Lou / Jimmy Valiant interview open. Like so good, so fine, feeling good, Captain Lou.
If you're not feeling good, what's the point of living, right?
I guess, right? PMA. That's what it's all about.
We're going to jump right into it. Mm-hmm. How did the love of wrestling start for you?
I don't really know. I remember being about 5 years old, flipping through channels, whatever the case was, and my first memory of pro wrestling was a promo, an interview of some sort with Andre the Giant and Bobby the Brain Heenan. And Andre was stepping on Bobby's hand or something like that, shaking his hand too hard, something like that. I don't know what about it hooked me and what about it I gravitated to, but that was probably around the time of WrestleMania 7. And I remember my first wrestling VHS tape was WrestleMania 7. My first WWF magazine was the WrestleMania 7 recap edition. So right around the spring of 91, it hooked me, it sucked me in, and from that age, the rest is history.
Did you have any favorites growing up?
I was always a fan of the villains. I was never a Hogan guy. To me, this is going to sound like I think I'm way smarter than I am, but to me, even at 5, like I got the Hogan formula. All right, nothing hurts him. He kicks out. I got it. Let's move on. I love Flair. I love DiBiase, Bobby Heenan, of course, Kurt Hennig. And then in later years, when Mankind came in, and Goldust and Austin and all those guys. So I guess I just always had that rebel spirit and that inner villain that pokes out once in a while. So I always gravitated to those guys.
Was there something specifically beside their villainy that drew you to these particular characters?
I don't really know. I mean, Bobby was always so entertaining. I mean, even if you hated Bobby, you loved to hate him. You looked forward to him coming out there. If there's something that sold me on Flair, it would have been the 1992 Royal Rumble. To this day, my favorite match, a match I could probably quote an obsessively large amount of as far as the commentary and just the sights and sounds. That was the first pay-per-view I ever watched live. And, Flair went almost coast to coast, an hour long, and, made history. And ever since then, again, even if you don't like Ric Flair, how do you not respect the contributions and the entertainment factor he brings to the game?
Oh, there's no doubt. That Royal Rumble match was amazing. I think about the matches with Steamboat and even later matches. He's there's something special about him.
Without a doubt. It took me a while to really, go back and appreciate the NWA era Flair. I was always a WWF kid. But as time went on, watching the Steamboat matches, watching Sting, watching Barry Windham, all the guys he would come across, of course, Randy Savage and WWF, Bret Hart, Flair could work that magic with just about anybody. And he had a way of having that kind of evergreen style that he can fit with, whether you're Ricky Steamboat or El Gigante or anywhere in between, he can pull something out of you with it.
Sure. A lot of times when people were kids is when they first are tuned up to wrestling, and then there's a period later on for a lot of folks that maybe they drift away from wrestling. Was there ever a point for you that you remember like, I'm going to do something else, I'm not going to watch wrestling, or has it always been wrestling?
I never really fully drifted away. I've had phases of fandom, with hockey and NASCAR and stuff like that, but I never truly drifted away from wrestling. I started to around the mid-'90s. I don't have a lot of memories from like 95, early 96, times like that. But then, when NWO came along and Austin started to rise up and you had Raw's War and the Monday Night Wars, that sucked me back in. I can remember like fall of 96, I got in the mail a copy of WWF Magazine on like a subscription basis. And that was really weird to me because I remember like my parents had sent in for that subscription like 2 years earlier. It had taken that long to come in. So it was like, I don't necessarily believe in fate and karma and destiny, but if it's one of those things where I was meant to be sucked into this, that was one of those moments, like from late 96 on, the business hit a huge boom period, and I was even more obsessed with it than ever from there.
I'm surprised to hear you had a phase of being a NASCAR fan, because I'm surprised when I hear anybody's a fan of NASCAR. I find it to be the most boring thing in the world. I know people love it. It's a huge spectator sport, but I mean, watching someone who likes wrestling, football, and NASCAR, it just seems, I don't know. I cannot grasp, and I'm a car guy. I just can't grasp NASCAR.
I mean, I fell out of it after a couple of years. I was a big fan of Dale Earnhardt, and once he had his accident, I kind of drifted away from it. I can't explain it, It's like you're a little kid, you see a shiny object in the corner, you want to go play with it for a while until something else comes along.
Sure. At some point, though, back to wrestling, you did find out about independent wrestling. How did that come about?
My first independent show was December of 1993. I was in second grade. And I didn't know what independent wrestling was. I just knew there was a wrestling event coming to what would later become my high school. And I don't remember a lot about it. I still have the event program. I know that the main event had a champion named Crusher Kloblanski, who...
A name I've heard.
Yeah, who had trained with Foley and Shane Douglas with Dominic. And he's mentioned in Foley's first book. I don't think he ever really hit any national stardom, but he was the first wrestler I met. He did a personal appearance at a comic book store, and I was, however old I was, 7 years old, I was just in awe of him. He's this huge guy. Lord Zoltan was on the event, as Lord Zoltan's been on every event for the past 40 years.
Since the beginning of time, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I remember a very young manager who was very annoying and dressed in purple, that everybody would yell Barney at.
I can guess who this is.
Yeah, that was the notorious one, Norm Connors, getting his start in the business. And again, full circle, circle of life. 9 years later in that same building, when it was my, at the time, current high school, I brought IWC Wrestling to that school under promoter Norm Connors, and that's how I got my start in the business. So one of those weird timing is everything type of things. But I didn't realize what independent wrestling was until the boom in the late 90s. And you had PWX on after ECW and WWF Shotgun, and Steel City was on, and Sal Connie had a show, Pan Atlantic Wrestling had a show. There were 4 different indies had a show on Pittsburgh TV in the span of a year, which is so unfathomable. I get paid to talk, to think about these days. But even back then, like I was still only 12 or 13, and looking at guys that are just friends now, like a Shirley Doe or Dennis Gregory or Brandon Kay, like they were larger than life to me. They were on TV, and that's when I first realized there's regular stuff happening around here. This exists, and I don't know how I'm going to wind up here, but one day I'm going to do it. There's no choice. There's no alternative.
Well, how did you wind up there?
Well, I started going to IWC events around summer of 2002. It was July 20th, 2002 to be exact. Heard an ad on 105.9 The X, and the main event for the IWC event at Isoplex in South Point in Canonsburg was Jerry the King Lawler versus Kamala.
Nice.
And as a kid who grew up with both of those on their TV all the time, how do you turn that down? So I was hooked, man. Colt Cabana was on the show. Balls Mahoney, Guido, York and Matthews, Doe, M-Dog, Dennis Gregory, sexual harassment, just a ton of guys. I was hooked. I was going to the events every month after that, every month I could at least. And it was, again, timing's everything. 3-4 months later, the Spanish class I was in high school at the time was looking for a fundraiser. And I knew Norm did fundraisers, so I kind of middlemanned bringing IWC to my high school. And I was only 17 at the time, but Norm wanted to have some local flavor on the show. There was a teacher that was a guest manager that was actually Super Hentai's high school amateur wrestling coach, something like that. There was some kind of relationship there. But there was a teacher there, and I was 17. I couldn't do anything physical, and why would you want to watch me do it anyway? So they stuck me with Jeff Gorman on commentary, and I was rotten. I will cringe if I have to watch that back, but that was the foot in the door. And the next month, I was back in the crowd. I did it once, and I was placated for the moment. It's like, all right, how do I do this all the time? And I didn't know. I didn't have an answer. What can I do? What can I contribute? I'm just a dumb, sheltered kid, But the show the next month was in Butler. And right after the main event, I remember I got a tap on the shoulder. And I turned around. It was referee Christopher Keely Capella. And he was the webmaster of IWCWrestling.com at the time. And he asked me if I wanted to come on and write results and maybe do some interviews and some articles and stuff like that. And I started, paying dues and, working my way up through .com. And then about 6 months doing that, Norm had a big show where all of his announcers were unavailable. Like Jeff Gorman, Chuck Roberts, they all had whatever it was. I think there was a wedding going on. I was the only option. So like Norm, I remember Norm, this is still on AIM because I'm very old and feeble. Just one at one point he messaged me, he's like, hope you're ready for August whatever. You're calling the whole show. And the IWC promoter was signed off. I'm like, what? That's it? Like he left me with that cliffhanger, probably on purpose. He's a drama queen. But I was like, God, now I gotta, this is my shot. And they brought in Kingdom James from Canada, who of course is a great talker and a veteran, and he was my analyst, and he was also the ring announcer. And looking back, I'm sure it was very rough and very, iffy from how I would grade my own performance, if not just downright awful. But I remember Norm coming to me after and saying, that was effing awful, or effing awesome. Sorry, I thought it was awful. And again, he saw something in me that I wasn't maybe projecting at the time, but he saw the potential there, and I appreciated that. And from that point, it was me, Jeff Gorman, and Kingdom James as the IWC announce team for the next 2 years until Gorman left.
Let's imagine, I know the people at home can't see it, but let's see, this big sauna here is a time machine. And I could send you today, I'll put you in that time machine, and you could have a conversation with yourself right before that first show. What type of advice would you give yourself, not just for that night, but for all the years that are coming up?
For that night, slow down. Because just like a wrestler gets nervous in the ring and goes too fast or wants to fit all their stuff in, I was very much the announcer version of that. I had my 10 pages of notes, and by God, if something looked good on paper, I wanted to fit it into the show. Slow down, relax, feed off of the moment a little more. And just in general, keep telling yourself you belong here. Because when I walked in here, I was a kid with no self-confidence, no self-esteem, hadn't really found myself, hadn't really grown up yet. And now I'm in awe because the locker room is filled with Shirley Doe, Dennis Gregory, T. Ranchel, Norm Connors. People 12-year-old me is watching on TV in a block with ECW and the WWF. This is overwhelming to me. So it took me a lot of time to kind of assimilate and convince myself that I was on this level, because I can be very self-deprecating. Not as much now, but especially back then. But honestly, whatever advice I told myself probably wouldn't have worked. I think I just had to kind of organically grow out of it and evolve. And it's a blessing and a curse that your, growing pains happen during AJ Styles and CM Punk matches. But it helped challenge me to be better, and it helped, help motivate me to work out the kinks and make every show better than the last, and really try to do justice to everybody in that locker room, because I did have so much respect for them. I did want a show so desperately that I could contribute, and that was my way of doing it. And I guess it's worked. It's however, it's been 15, 16 years later, and I'm still a proud part of the IWC locker room. We're
jumping ahead a little bit here, but you put it into my mind with the AJ Styles and CM Punk match. Throughout, I would imagine you've called thousands of matches to this point. Do you have a few specific matches that you personally have called that's been some of your favorites?
That's such a tough question because, it's like asking a parent their favorite kid and you've got 5,000 kids. A few stick out to me. The ones that make me feel the most, I'm very emotion driven. You can do all the moves in the world, but if there's not an emotion behind it and a story behind it and an abject goal to be attained, you're not going to hook me 100%. One of the most emotional matches, I remember Jimmy DeMarco and DJ Z at one of the I don't remember if it was Winner Take All or Call to Arms at that time, but the big December show here, that stands out a lot. The stuff I did in Cleveland, PWO and Prime Wrestling with Johnny Gargano and Gregory Irons stands out. That was a very emotional year-long story we told with them that ended in a last man standing match. Recent matches, there was so many at the Revolution Pro show I did down in New Orleans. Just watching guys like Zack Sabre Jr. and Ishii and Ospreay and guys like that. Again, not your slow burn angle type of story, but just as wrestling as an art form, so beautiful. Some of the New Japan guys I've had a chance to call stuff with, like Motor City Machine Guns the Time Splitters. Alex Shelley and Kushida versus P.D. Williams and Brent Banks, I think it was. That stands out. I could pick one or two from everywhere I've been. And, some of them, it's just because I'm working with somebody that I grew up watching. Some of them, it's just the art. Some of them, it's the story behind. Some of them, it's the crowd. Ring of Honor, there's been so many good ones with Davey Richards and Tyler Black stands out because that's a really well-known match. The Kings of Wrestling and the Briscoes, the Steen Generico feud. They'll fight for the rest of their lives pretty much. But that was so great because it was emotion driven, and Karina was such a great promo with that. I could go on, but it's just I've had the fortune of doing every style. I could do a Ring of Honor show one week, and then the next week I'm voicing over a North Carolina high school gym, like Rock and Roll Express main event. It's everything has its place, and you can learn from everything, and you can take something away from every style, I think.
Was this the goal in the beginning, or early on were you thinking, I could really be a great manager, maybe I could be a great referee, maybe I could even be a wrestler? Was there any thought of that when you were younger?
I didn't know what I wanted to do. I really wasn't sure what my destiny was. I thought about managing, I thought about refereeing, I thought about announcing.
Never wrestling?
I was never an athlete. I was a fat kid. I was the most coordinated. If I had a skill, it was either mental or verbal.
Well, just to build off of that, I don't know if you've seen some of the shows around. You don't have to be an athlete to be a wrestler, but that's another story for another day.
That's very, very true, and I won't get into that. But it's one of those things where that's where Norm put me, and that was where the opening was, and it was, of course, I was an only child, and I was, kind of sheltered, so my life was Hasbro action figures. That was my escape. That was my hobby. And that's where I would call the matches as Gorilla and Bobby, and I would book my own stuff. And that was kind of like my initiation to, like, even though I didn't really know what I was doing and didn't really know the ins and outs and the art of it, I was still able to kind of create and get some kind of a rhythm down as far as just thinking about it. And then as I got in the business and was actually working with people, and they said, well, no, that doesn't work because of this. Oh, okay. Well, how do I make it better? How do I circumnavigate that? So I always thought I'd do something along those lines. And when the commentary thing came up, of course, being a big fan of Bobby and Gorilla and Jesse Ventura and, so many others, and Jim Ross, I got to mention JR, I put everything I had into it. And if this was the path they wanted me to do, then I'm going to do it. And if it doesn't work, find something else. But thankfully it worked out.
In your opinion, what makes a great announcer?